So after that month, where'd you end up going? Back home?
Went back to the States and went to England, and I was stationed in England then. So really, in my career in the 60s, I was in Europe the whole time,
Wow.
and Vietnam. So I really was not in the States, ever stationed in the States.
You went to the factory, right, to go pick up a jet?
Oh yeah, that was in yeah, when we were in France, we'd pick up brand new airplanes
Yeah, yeah.
out of McDonnell Douglas, and it was a great trip because sometimes you could go over and they would schedule, if they had the time, they'd give you an extra 3 or 4 days. St. Louis wasn't far from Tulsa, in Oklahoma, and I would jump down there and see my family and real quick and tell her how it was going on getting there. Because you didn't have really communication back in the States. A long distance phone call was a big deal back then. But then be it at McDonnell Douglas to pick up the airplanes, and they had a military ops there, and the astronauts would come in once in a while, and they were training for the Gemini, the two-man, and it was Bassett and C and Stafford and Cernan, and it was one of those spring days, late February, early March. They had wet snow, low ceiling, and they came in. He was going to make a circling approach, and I heard him go overhead. They warned me, the astronauts were coming in. I went out to watch and heard him circle overhead. I couldn't see him, and then he hit the building right behind me. And I heard it hit. I couldn't believe it. Of course, I'm kind of in shock, and then you hear all the fire trucks and everybody going in. Then the other Stafford and Cernan land, and it was a whole just the base went nuts with the press, and everybody were out there immediately on the whole thing. I got to sit in on the brief with Stafford and Cernan talking about what they did, what the approach was, what had happened, what they agreed the ceiling was, and what the ceiling had been called. If you read the accident report, it pretty well puts it on pilot error on C, who was in the front seat. He allowed the nose to get low, and he lit the burner. He knew he was low.
Wow.
And he actually, because he was slow, he got more turn out of the way than he had originally planned. He was going faster. He thought he would be outside the building in that turn, but because he was slow, he got the turn in pretty quick and was inside and hit the building, hit the top of the building, went through the roof. It was crazy. Anyway, Tom Stafford threatened me with my life if I ever revealed any of the secrets that were divulged on the table at McDonnell Douglas, and it was a big threat at that time. Told me he would take my career if I ever revealed any of those. I held those dearly to my heart for about 50 years until I met him again once I'd become a general, and I was at a dinner in Washington, D.C., and I got there early and ran into him and introduced myself to him again and told him that we had met before. He may not remember. He said, I don't. He said, tell me about it. I said, well, it was at McDonnell Douglas in February 66 when you. He said, really? I said, yeah, I was, and you threatened me, and I told him on and on what happened. And he started crying, and he said, geez, I haven't thought of that so long. And he said, that's exactly what happened. And then we became friends after that. He was an Oklahoma boy, and we struck up a friendship. Yeah, it was good.
What a tragic thing, though.
I
mean, it almost took out the Gemini capsule, right? I mean, it was.
It did.
A few.
Oh, it was in the same hangar. Yeah, where they been doing their training. Yeah, wow. It was crazy.
So in going back, sorry to interrupt that, but you went to England, right? After.
Yeah, I went to RAF Alconbury, north of London, and they had 3 squadrons on base: the 30th, the 32nd, and the 1st Attack Recon Squadrons. I think it was the 10th wing. Yeah, 10th Recce Wing. And they had fighters at Lakenheath and Wethersford, and then tankers and transport at RAF Mildenhall. And that's was most of the Air Force. They had some ground forces, a few in the area, but not very many. It was right in East Anglia, right where a lot of the World War II bases were during the air bases that were airship. A lot of it were just grass fields anymore. But great history.
Did you get to bring your family?
Yes, had the family over there.
Yeah.
And it was a great tour. And it was a great place for flying over in Europe also, you know, wherever you wanted to go in Europe. We spent a lot of time in flying Germany. We would go cross country to Fürstenfeldbruck. Fürstenfeldbruck is down at Munich. And Munich during Oktoberfest was a good place to go. And Fürstenfeldbruck was a fighter base in World War II. And they loved to have fighters come down for Oktoberfest.
That's awesome.
And you absolutely had a license to steal down there. And they wanted an arrival show and a departure show. And you'd be cleared in, do initial, low approach, then beat up the base a couple of turns and then land. Awesome. Depending on how good your arrival show was, would depend on how good a parking space you would get on the ramp. Because it would be pretty crowded with fighters.
Yeah.
And then if you had a good base, a good show, then you'd give them a good departure show, leave out.
Wow.
It was a great place to go.
This was the height of the Cold War. So are you sitting alert still here as well and thinking about the Russian threat?
Yeah, sitting alert. And, you know, we had a simulator then. Back then, the simulator would roll and pitch, but they had an actual built terrain of Europe where your mission was, all of Poland and East Germany and on over into Czechoslovakia, all those areas where you might have targets. And you were certified online. You would go down and fly that, certify that line in the simulator of the actual terrain that you were going to fly. They were hard certifications. Yeah. I mean, they grilled you. It was like a week long. You know, you were in it. You had to brief your target. You knew it inside out. You know, you knew what the buildings, every building was used for, where they might have defenses, and what was their primary target. It was going to be in that area.
Wow.
And we had great squadron exchanges with other recce squadrons. The Dutch had great recce. The Brits had recce, Germans, and we had great squadron exchanges with them. And they were all within NATO, so most of our NATO targets were shared with them. Now, there were some things that you did not share, obviously, but in your discussions, you'd find out their targets in Poland was close to your target in Poland. They would have a hard time getting there, but they were much closer, and they could get to Poland. Ours was kind of a one-way mission, and we would land someplace in the Netherlands or in West Germany, usually, and we couldn't make it back to England.
Wow. So you had to memorize your target set. I mean, you knew if the balloon went up, this is where I'm going. There's
you set alert. You would be rolling within minutes. You had a cartridge start in the F-4 with the practice with the big puff of smoke and a bang, and you'd be instantly 60% RPM, and you wanted to grab it because you only had one shot at it.
Wow, was it prone to hot start or having issues with that?
Yeah. You know, the cartridge start was not perfected back then, and that was really the only hot start that you had to the F-4 at the time.
Wow.
They would have a backup, but if you would fail your launch parameters if you had to wait for them to hook up a pollution unit to get your RPM up.
Could you start one engine off the other? It wasn't like the T-38 where you had to have the Palouse both sides, like one's
both
going
sides. You know, you had carts on both sides. Yeah.
Oh, you did. Okay.
I was going to tell the story of we were cross country over in Europe in one of these exchanges, and we were at Hahn Air Force Base. And Bitburg and Hahn were two German Air Force bases, and they had F-4s there at the time. And they're on a hill, kind of. Back in the day, the wing commander had an idea that would camouflage the base. He camoed the runways, painted them camo, so they wouldn't show up as big white streaks on the green land. But it also sent the RVR right through the roof. So guys were landing and sliding off the runway and taxiing, they'd slide off the runway. I mean, it was just, it was just like taxiing on glass. We were there to, right after they had cleared the runway, had re-scraped it and got all the paint off to do some photography of the airfield after the paint was scraped off. The weather went to 0-0. We were there for 4 days in our flight suits with nothing else. I mean, no toothbrush, no anything. Because it was just a day out and back. Finally, the wing commander needed to get to Wheelus. And so we were in base ops, sitting there sleeping. And the guy said, "You want to go? You better go now. Wing commander's coming out. And he's got a skyjack." I said, "Okay, yeah, we'd like that." So he taxied out the end of the runway and asked for the weather, and it was 501. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. They got it on the radio that it was 501, and he was cleared, and he took off. And Kodak, if you want to go, you better go now. So we were right behind him on the runway. I can remember looking at my viewfinder and having the yellow stripe of the runway right down the middle, and took off, looking straight down the whole time, making sure I stayed on the center line, because you could not see anything in front of you.
That is awesome.
Oh, it was crazy. Yeah. But, wow. You know, but you get to 150 feet and it was sunshine clear.
And I guess the weather over there at your destination wasn't as bad.
No, it wasn't as bad, but they were sitting, like I say, they were up on a hill. Weather was always bad at Bitburg and Hahn.
I got you.
It was just one of those things. But weather in Europe, you learn to fly. A lot of weather in Europe. Yeah, it's a great place to fly, though. Great flying. And you know, when I got back, I came back to the States, got out of the Air Force in '70, and I don't know if you remember that in the '70s we had the whole man concept, and every officer had to have the ambition to be the chief of staff of the Air Force. And it just wasn't my ambition to be the chief of staff of the Air Force. And I love flying. And I told them I would stay and fly and retire as a major if they'll let me stay in the cockpit. And no, you got to go do a staff job. And I understand that was their policy at the time. But so several of us got out and moved on. Most went to airlines. And I went to law school. And
really?
I had at University of Tulsa here, and my class was about a third of them were veterans, actually. Mm-hmm. Army, Marines, Air Force, going to law school.
Was it Montgomery GI? What GI? Was there a
GI Bill? Montgomery GI Bill, yeah.
Yeah.
And it would pay tuition. I was flying for the Guard at that time. And the reason I came to Tulsa was actually they were flying C-124 transports at the time, but they were programmed to get fighters, and they were recruiting guys who had fighter time. So actually, when I got out, I first checked out. I had a few flights in the 124, and that was a real experience. Landing an airplane from the third story of a cockpit up there is really interesting. And I respect those guys tremendously. They would fly around the world at 8,000 feet. I mean, it's just crazy.
So you got checked out in that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, went out the Pacific, went to Hawaii several times, and Europe a couple of times.
What was the general mission? Just cargo, troops? And
cargo,
stuff?
Oversized cargo. Yeah.
Wow.
Always carry. Went to Anahuac and Kwajalein down in the South Pacific where they would take a lot of testing gear because they did a lot of the nuclear testing down there.
Yeah.
Big oversized stuff.
How'd you like the crew concept after being a fighter guy?
I could just never master that. It was just beyond me. I was never an aircraft commander and didn't want to be. Crew concept is, I really respect those guys. And it's the only way to fly that airplane or any big airplane is to have that crew coordination and concept. But, you get used to flying by yourself or with a guy in the back only. And then especially getting into fighter, single seat, anybody else in the airplane, you get used to real quick. All I want to hear is to and lead you on fire. That's it. I mean, keep your mouth shut and let's go.
Yeah, exactly.
They used to have, the red flags that we would have out in Las Vegas, and they also had maple flags. Do they still have maple flags?
I think so. Yeah, I think they're still doing those.
Yeah, way up north, and they do them in the summer, and they're just a great exercise because it's just unlimited flying up there.
Yeah.
And they would do what's called a silent launch, and the whole mission was silent. No radio calls at all, except for if you had an emergency, legit. And it still, to this day, gives me chills thinking about all those airplanes moving and taxiing on time around that base, onto the runway, taking off without a radio call, awesome. All based on time, going to the target area, never making a call.
Yeah.
Coming back and land, and you think, holy cow, did we just do that without making a radio call?
What is the penalty if you make a radio call? Is it like, rounds on you at the O Club? I mean,
yeah, basically. And you would try to deny that wasn't me. Yeah, you heard me click.
So how long did you fly the cargo before they transitioned?
Oh, 6 months.
Oh, it wasn't long at all then.
Oh no, 6 months a year. When I was first starting in law school, and then since they were going to the F-100, and they gave us T-33s to fly. So I checked out in the T-33, and we actually had T-33s on the ramp with a airlift patch on them because we were still in airlift command.
AMC? Yeah, wow.
And it was kind of interesting, and all they wanted us to do was to get flying time. Most of the guys get them all checked out, flying with the stick again, flying with take off and fly it cross country just to get time on it. It was great.
Did guys going from that aircraft, flying heavies, have trouble transitioning because they had been used to that and you were a fighter guy?
Yeah, not everybody transitioned, obviously. A few of the guys that flew fighters in Korea or had flown fighters previously with the Guard, because they had RF 84s there at the base, and F-84s rather. And so several of the guys had fighter time in Korea and they're in the Guard. And so some of those transitioned, some of them didn't.
Was it pretty tough getting hired in general? I mean, was it kind of like, what was the Guard like at this time, in the 60s and 70s? I mean, this is a different time. So what was it like even getting hired?
Well, I think, of course, it's just like today, to some extent, they look for guys that had that experience. And they were looking for guys that had fighter experience other than airlift experience. And so if you had fighter experience, you were able to get in. And the Guard the mission was expanding. There was ample slots if you wanted to fly, but it wouldn't always be where you wanted, obviously. And we had a requirement that everybody live in town. That was their requirement and always has been.